Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming along to this screening of Renoir's La Règle du Jeu. I noticed that David O'Mahony in his programme notes mentioned the fact that the Sight and Sound has included this film in every one of its 6, polls of the greatest films ever made, in one of which I voted actually. But it's always with Citizen Kane but below Citizen Kane. We know it's a great film, but I'm always surprised talking to people how few people have actually seen it. It's not, well, I first saw it on TV in the 1980s, but old films aren't shown on television anymore, especially old French films. So if you want to go, and if people have seen a Renoir film, it's usually Grande Illusion, his 1937 anti-war film, which more people will be familiar with. So if you want to watch this film, you kind of have to go looking for it, but it is very, very worthwhile. I first saw it, as I said, in the 80s, and I was fascinated by it, though I didn't quite follow it the first time because it was so busy, so much was going on. And when I saw it on a big screen, I began to realise just what we were dealing with. Nobody really knows if Orson Welles, I don't know if you know, Kevin, if Orson Welles and Greg Toland saw this before they did Citizen Kane. They may not have because it did so badly. But if they did, they were surely influenced by the depth of focus in this film, which is really unusual, and which allows you to follow the sort of licentious comings and goings of the characters who are running around in the background. In this film, nobody doesn't act, nobody stops acting because it's not safe, because Renoir's camera will catch you. It was a change of pace for Renoir because through the 30s in this extraordinary purple patch he'd made a series of films like La Marseillaise and La Bête Humaine that investigated the plight of the French working class. They were overtly political films. He was involved with the Front Populaire, who were fighting Nazis or fascist sympathisers in the streets of Paris at that time. And he'd even contributed to the Communist Party propaganda film La Vie est à nous in 1936. So he'd done his bit. But by this time, by the start of 1939, he wanted something different. He wanted something lighter. In any case, he may have thought that the game was up because Hitler had already annexed Czechoslovakia and his thoughts were turning elsewhere. So Renoir might have figured, and a lot of people figured, that France wouldn't do too well if he turned his attentions to the West. This film was intended as a divertissement, a kind of comedy of manners, and it was influenced by people, by classic plays by Marivaux and de Musset and people like that. And in particular de Musset's Vie de Marianne, which he kind of borrowed quite a bit of the plot of, but that's neither here nor there. The plot, quite simply, is not simple at all. An aviator a dashing aviator called Honoré Jolieu, he lands in Paris having crossed the Atlantic in record time. But is he happy? He is not happy. He is French, and he's very disappointed that the woman that he loves has not turned up to meet her. He tells his friend Octave, who is played by Jean Renoir and is the kind of melancholy clown of the film, that he calls her disloyal, but that's kind of complicated because she's married to somebody else. She is married to the Marquis de la Fresnaye, who's played by the great Marcel Dalio, who is this sort of jaded aristocrat. She is Christine. She is this very statuesque, stiff Austrian beauty. And she's married to this aristocrat who is really a sort of very jaded, sophisticated person. Who refers to her as dear friend and seems more interested in his mechanical clocks and toys than he is in her. Even his mistress, Geneviève, who's a tough person, as you'll see, she gets short shift from him. And when his wife, Christine, says to him one day, I trust you implicitly, he becomes so guilty that he decides to give up his mistress and deserve my wife, as he puts it. So he does give her up, but meanwhile, Octave, the Renoir character, has persuaded the Marquis to invite André Jurieu to his country pile for the weekend. Octave is going too. He secretly loves Christine as well, and so are a various collection of useless and unemployable twits, it has to be said, who will lay waste to half the countryside when they go on a famous hunting trip. There's lots of intrigues, but they're mirrored among the servants, who are also very colourful. Christine's maid, Lisette, has been running around with Octave, but also becomes interested in this poacher who's hired as a servant. He's played by the great comic actor Julien Carat. So all of this is going down upstairs and below, and all these various plots are going to combine disastrously during an amateur show that the toffs put on because they have nothing better to do. There are 3 scenes in this film that really, really stand out. For me, the first is obviously that great hunting sequence where the birds and beasts of a nearby wood are mercilessly terrorised by these armed rich people who slaughter, pheasants and quail and even rabbits. And one rabbit, in this heartbreaking moment, he sort of stretches after being shot as if he's about to sort of go to sleep, but he's about to go to the big sleep. But Renoir didn't shoot any of that because he was squeamish. He asked his second unit to do it because he couldn't bear the sight of blood. The second sequences are the ones in the kitchen that are really special for me, where the large, imposing chef caters to the dietary whims of the haute bourgeoisie. He says at one point, "J'accepte des régimes, mais pas des manies." He's a very funny person. He also quells a bout of anti-Semitism around the servants' dining table because the Marquis is part Jewish, and the servants are muttering darkly about this when he tells them a story. The Marquis had complained about the quality of a potato salad because he had noticed the fact that a lazy sous chef had forgotten to pour white wine over the freshly boiled potatoes, which one must always do. And the chef says, "You can say what you like, but that is a mark of a gentleman." So, but the third scene that I love, and the most important scene, or the most important scene for me, is during that show that the Toffs put on, when, accompanied by a tinny pianola, these men dressed as ghosts and luminous skeletons dance across the stage, and Renoir's camera zooms around the room, catching the briefly distracted faces of all the people who would otherwise be engaged in intrigue and so on and so forth. It's a very special moment in a very special film, but the contemporary French public did not think so. When it was released in 1939, it bombed at the box office. The critics panned it. It was declared all sorts of unpatriotic. One disgruntled patriot even tried to burn the cinema down mid-screening by setting fire to his newspaper. When the Nazis came in, it was banned and then almost lost for decades, and Renoir's ensemble was scattered to the 4 winds. Marcel Dalio went to Hollywood just in time because the Nazis had used a picture of him in a poster depicting the typical Jew. Renoir also went to Hollywood, and he worked there for 12 years, and he made some good films, but never quite as good as that sparkling purple patch in the 1930s that led and culminated in this film, which is one of the greatest films ever made, I think, and I hope you enjoy it.